these results with everybody. This is a project that we did, I guess, completed a couple of years ago. We worked on it for a series of times, so it's a little bit far removed. So I put this together from a report that we did that is available if you'd like it. I'm going to stick the script a little bit here, and I'll be going through some of this pretty quickly because there's a lot of methods in this, in which goes a lot to what we were able to do and the results. So I'll just step through this. But I'm going to do this a little different. First of all, this was a big team effort, so I really want to thank all the team members there. One of the members back there, Joe. Bob was here. You can finally see him in just a moment. But this was certainly a big team effort, and could not have been done by myself. So first of all, Stairsteps, it's a large part of the Big Cypress area. It's pretty much, well, it is all of the area for the most part south of 41. It's about 25% of the area. It's divided up into 4 different zones, and it's primarily lowlands. Now, within the preserve, a number of stakeholders have expressed to both Big Cypress and Fish and Wildlife about declining deer herds. This has been observed both in our harvest data and in a number of deer seen during aerial surveys by both the Park Service and the Wildlife Agency. Hunters primarily expressed concern a few years back about lower than number of deer that they'd seen historically in Zone 4. That's in the far southeast corner of the preserve. And as we started to look at this more, several hypotheses were thrown out there as possible reasons. High water levels, predation, diseases, parasites, both legal and illegal harvests, habitat degradation, things like lack of fire, or combinations of these factors. And as a lot of the talks have come before here, the whole ecology of the Big Cypress Preserve is attenuated to the seasonal and annual flow of water. Obviously, fluctuations in water depth, as we've heard, can affect fish and things like that. Can also affect mammals such as deer. This cycle can rise in all of water, can affect things like deer movement, their habitat use, and indirectly then their home range sizes. When water depths are high, deer might have to expend more energy to move over areas and may be restricted to higher elevation sites. And in Zone 4 of Stairsteps, things like the tree islands. Obviously, when you're restricted to these high and drier sites, that can increase your vulnerability to things like predation, diseases, malnutrition. Increased stress can lead to other things like loss of fecundity or reproduction. So, as we know, in this part of the world, we have experienced where high water levels have impacted deer populations. That's mainly been in the impounded areas of the Everglades. But we know historically from some previous studies that in Zone 4, high levels of water have impacted deer because of the low topography itself. We know historically that an extreme flooding event in fall of 94 to the spring of 95 did result in accelerated mortality and reduced productivity of deer in Stairsteps Zone 4. Since 94-95, the Stairsteps, as we know from our hydrological records, hasn't experienced the same levels of high water, but there is some evidence that in that data that there has been increased high water levels since that time. So our objective in this study was to investigate the relationship between white-tailed deer population indices and the hydrological data in the Stairsteps Unit that we had from the 1980s to 2002. Okay. We had data on total harvest, hunter effort-adjusted harvest, and aerial survey data. The hunter data we used in this study was from 88-89 to 2009-2010. And the reason why those years are like that is because the season starts in September and then extends over into January. So it's sort of a multi-year type of thing. The harvest data we're available for Stairsteps Unit as a whole, we don't collect data by individual zone, although in the last couple of years we have been doing that. The aerial surveys were conducted both by Fish and Wildlife and the National Park Service, with the methods, the timing, and the locations of the transects did vary. The Park Service's surveys began in '94 using a helicopter and have continued twice annually since then, with the exception of 2008 when some funding limitations did prevent surveys. 2002 using a fixed wing plane, but that ceased after 2002, and we picked it up again with helicopter in 2010. And because of that big data gap, we didn't use any of our flight data in this analysis. So this is relying mainly on the, well, only on the Park Service's data. So these just sort of illustrate the transects a little bit. These are one of the Park Services. These are the yellow ones of the Park Services, and these are just the red ones I just threw in there, just that we fly, just to sort of show the areas where we fly. These different little spots here are just some hydrologic monitoring stations I'll be referring to a little bit later, just to show their spatial proximity to where we've actually counted deer. Okay, so the Park Service conduct their surveys in spring and late summer. The spring survey is to determine fawn-doe ratios, and the summer is to determine the doe-buck ratios. The helicopters were flown along those three permanent transects that I showed there before, but to determine the sex of the deer, they veer off the transects a little bit, and to allow a little bit closer look at the deer, determine their sex, things like that. To adjust for variation in this surveying, we used a measure of effort. So we calculated the population index as the number of deer observed per minute. So we, fortunately enough, good flight time records and things like that were kept so we could sort of normalize the data and make it more comparable. Now the Big Cypress Hydrological Network, as many people here know that have been working with this data, includes a network of 20 stations there where the daily water level stage data is collected. And this is just sort of illustrative of what a couple look like. And we selected the A10, P34, Loop 1, and Loop 2 stations based on their proximity to the study area and their relevance to our objective. The P34 gauge down here on the bottom of Stairsteps 4 is the best indicator for the Zone 4, which is our focus of interest. But we did combine the data from the other stations to give an index for overall the Stairsteps. Some of you are familiar with the Go Hydrology site, we're familiar with these figures, but for each station, the elevation was subtracted, the elevation at the site was subtracted from the raw stage data to standardize the water level across each station. This was done so that you get an analysis of a threshold water level value as it relates to a habitat. And Bob Sobczak could go into this more, how this is all determined, but as I understand it, it is predominantly based on surveys actually at the site. So it is real. That's why if you look at the different elevations, different sites, they have different values. A 1 is not necessarily a 1 else. Okay. Now we use 4 water levels as threshold values and indicators of high water, 30, 50, 60, and 70 centimeters. These cutoff values were based basically from literature on what we felt from previous studies would most influence deer habitat. Greater than 70 constitute a really extreme high water event, and that would severely impact deer movement, survival, and productivity in our judgment. Around 60 centimeters constitute the maximum depth that can be endured by a deer without negative influences. In that range between 61 and 71, that's when the pines and some of the tree and islands are inundated with water, to sort of give it a perspective. Around 50 centimeters constitute what we feel was the maximum depth that became endured by deer before survival and productivity are impeded. And at this step, the water started to enter the bayhead and the hydro pine habitats. 30 centimeters was used as a cutoff for the sort of optimal deer habitat, and below 30 centimeters is really your water's only left down in your swamp forest and in your deeper slough areas. So, we estimated the average water levels and the number of high-level events per year and per month. We estimated water levels during 3 seasons, designated as the fawn fell in 1, 2, and then during the hunting season. Weeks where the average water depth was greater than that threshold level was labeled as a high water event. The number of weeks that included high water events per season and per year were calculated. The number of high water weeks was converted to a percent scale to account for the varying number of weeks in the seasons among years. Harvest indices indicated that deer populations began to decline in 1999, whereas the survey data indicated the decline began in 2002. So we broke up the period by using chi-square analysis between the 84 to 98 versus the 99 to 2009, the 84 to 2001 versus the 2008 to 2009, to look at the difference in number of months with high water events, both before and after these apparent population declines. A month was designated as a high water if any week within that month had a water level that exceeded one of our threshold levels. And that was sort of a conservative approach. As you know, anyone who work with hydrology, it varies up and down, but we were looking at a conservative type approach in that regard. Data for 1995 were excluded, though, from the analysis because it was an abnormally higher flood year, and which may have washed out any trends, so we took that out. Now, the hydrological graphs indicated there was an overall shift to more frequent and longer high water events beginning in about 1994. So again, we used chi-square analysis to compare the number of high water events both before and after this period. Now, to assess whether these changes in high water levels could be attributed to rainfall, the total rainfall compiled for the monitoring stations was compared for each period using t-test. We used rain correlations to evaluate the relationship between these hydrological indicators during a season and the corresponding total and effort-adjusted harvest. And for those that are hunting or maybe do recreation out here, you'll know that periodically the units do get closed for high water level events. So we performed different analysis to sort of take into account for that. One for the entire hunting season, and a separate analysis taking into account closure periods. Okay, the analysis incorporating all the harvest and hydrological data for the entire period from September to December attempted to account for the high water effects on deer during the complete season, regardless of the presence of hunters. The second analysis, we excluded both harvest and water data corresponding to the season, such as archery season, if an area was closed, whether the closure was partial or full. And this was done to analyze possible correlations of hydrological conditions in deer populations when the unit was open and access was not limited. Another thing we were looking at as it relates to the reproductive capacity of the deer is we looked at the relationships between harvest levels to hydrological conditions during the fall and vulnerability seasons 2.5 years prior. Because we assumed that if water levels during a given fawning season had an effect on recruitment, we would expect a 2.5-year lag for those impacts to be evident during the harvest. And that's, because we have a legal deer that's a 5-inch answer, so that was sort of deemed as period that we would get to that harvestable deer. And again, we looked for correlations between the hydrological conditions during the fawn vulnerability seasons and the corresponding fawn-doe ratios from aerial surveys. We used multiple regression models to relate the harvest and effort-adjusted harvest to the hydrological data. And we found a high degree of collinearity between the majority of these variables, which is not good in statistics. So to address this, we used the principal components of these values. And for those, just quickly, principal components are independent dimensionless indexes, linear, and they're combinations of the original parameters, which then can be used in analysis. And then we built the multiple regression models with the principal component scores, which allow us to investigate the relationship between the hydrological data and harvest without introducing bias in the results. So this just illustrates these are deer down here. There's a different time of the year. Red means high water, blue means dry or no water. And you can see here that the number of high water events has increased significantly in recent decades. Right here is 94, if you can see it. And in the occurrence of high water weeks between the 94 break and the 96 break for both the 30 centimeter, the 50 centimeter, and the 60 centimeter levels, but not the 70. There was no significant difference in yearly total rainfall during the same periods, which then sort of brings the question in that these high water events are not necessarily related to rainfall. These plots here are illustrating the harvest and the aerial survey data, and you can see that about 1999 is when the deer herd started to crash off. And I mean, you can see the degree. It's pretty dramatic. Okay, so when harvest levels appear to decline after that 2001 period, there was no significant difference in the occurrence of high water weeks for the 30 and 70 centimeter levels. There was significant differences for the 50 and 60 centimeter levels. And again, as with the previous comparisons, there was no significant difference in the yearly total rainfall during this time period. There was no correlation between the effort-adjusted harvest and the hydrological conditions. When the data during the closure periods were excluded, average water depth and high water weeks greater than 60 centimeters were significantly correlated with the harvest. So what that sort of means is as the water levels increased, the harvest increased. Significant correlations for non-closure periods appear to be a function of reduced pressure, as we found significant correlations between pressure and water levels. There was a positive correlation between high water events greater than 30 centimeters and 50 centimeters during the first farm vulnerability period and harvest 2.5 years later. All hydrological parameters during the first fawn vulnerability period were negatively correlated with the corresponding fawn down ratios. None of the hydrological conditions of the second fawn vulnerability period were correlated with fawn down ratios. Neither of the multiple regression models with the principal components was significant. So one way, the most straightforward way to interpret this analysis is that while the hydrological parameters may relate to the effort-adjusted harvest, they are not significant in their ability to model and predict harvest. All right, now to try to bring this all together and put it into perspective, the white-tailed deer population in the Stairsteps Unit has sharply declined in the past decade, with recent surveys and harvest numbers indicating a near complete population crash. High water levels, as we went into this, have been hypothesized as the cause of this decline. Evaluation of the hydrological data confirmed that the number and duration of high water events where water depth exceeded 50 centimeters has become significantly more common since those 94-95 flood periods. Comparison of high water levels pre and post deer population declines also demonstrated significant change in hydrological parameters between these periods. Based on deer population estimates, it appeared that following the 94 flood, there was a period of recovery for about 3 to 6 years, followed by a steady decline. Harvest trends were stable to increasing during the early 90s, but began declining considerably after 97. Population trends based on the Park Service's aerial survey showed a steady increase after the 1994 flood, but then followed by high deer counts in 1999, 2001, and then declining after 2001. In a decade's time, total counts have dropped from a high of 642 in 2001 to a low of 7 in 2010. When all hydrological data were included in the analysis, regardless of closure, average water levels were somewhat negatively correlated with total harvest. However, when harvest was adjusted for effort, none of the hydrological parameters were significantly correlated with harvest. When we excluded closure data, we found a negative correlation between harvest and all of the biological parameters. Again, when it was adjusted for effort, the correlations disappeared. These patterns suggest that the harvest decreases were a direct result of reduced pressure associated with high water levels. In fact, we found significant negative correlations between pressure. Hydrologic conditions during the early fawn period appear to have an effect on fawn survival, as shown by decreasing fawn-to ratios with increasing water levels. During most fawning occurs in February and March, period that coincides with the driest months. Fawn-to ratios were lowest in years when water levels were above 30 to 50 centimeters during that period, when fawns are presumably most vulnerable. This suggests that recruitment is lower during years with high water levels. Unfortunately, though, we don't have the recruitment data from the late 80s to the early 90s when the deer population appeared to be stable and increasing, and that's not bad for us to look at. However, based on the average weekly water depths during the fawn vulnerability period from 85 to 94, there were only a few instances where the average water depths exceeded 30 or 50 centimeters. We also investigated the relationship between hydrologic conditions during fawning season and harvest, as it seemed plausible that if water levels influenced recruitment, any drop or increase in recruitment would be evident in harvest when that particular cohort reaches the leaf harvest stage. Our results, however, were conflicting with that. While there was no relationship between hydrologic conditions during the fawning season 2.5 years prior, and adjusted harvest, there was a positive correlation with effort-adjusted harvest levels. This suggests that when water levels during fawn vulnerability were high, subsequent effort-adjusted harvest levels were also high. This discrepancy may be due to the fact that although harvest provides good population trend data, it does not translate well into point estimates of population status due to a variety of factors that affect harvest levels. In the adjacent unit there, Loop, just north of Zone 4, we've also noticed a decrease in the harvest since about 2001. The Loop unit has a slightly higher elevation than Stairsteps, so maybe that might explain why the population decrease hasn't been as high, but it's still trending in a similar type of way. Based on the harvest records and aerial survey that we've done in other parts of the preserve, the deer populations do not appear to be declining. Places like Bear Island, the addition. Now, one of the things that confronted us early on in here is that, testing these types of hypotheses on free-ranging wildlife after the fact was very challenging. Even with the sound study design, a lot of the talks before have had the ability to design experiments, go into them. We were looking at something sort of 10 years after the fact with data that we really didn't have that was specifically collected to address the question. So it is very, very difficult to try to do this with correlational data, and that's why, sort of going to the extra effort to step through these methods in the analysis, because while there might be some anecdotal trends, they might not be robust enough to really hang your hat on as conclusive reasons. So, for the time period of interest, there are no estimates of deer productivity and survival or data on causes of mortality in deer that would allow us to better understand the causes. The Stairsteps population appeared to have recovered from 94-95 floods. However, the following recurring years, high water events that we have shown, and the various impacts high water has or may have on deer populations might cause the population to decline over time due to lower productivity, reduced recruitment, and higher mortality. Long-term research on causes of mortality and survival rates of fawns and adults may be necessary to clarify the role of hydrology on deer populations in the area. Other factors such as the role of predators and changes in habitat conditions should also be measured to allow for the interpretation of our study results. That's it. If you've got any questions, or if you'd like to maybe get a copy of the report that has a lot more detail, you can email me or give us a call and I can